Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for a new episode of the Women's Eye Podcast. We are brought to you by the Casco Financial Group in Phoenix, Arizona. Casco's president, Catherine Scrivano, started her business to help people like you create the financial strength to achieve your dreams. I'm your guest host, Laura Munson. And the Women's Eye has been a wonderful support of my work, from my memoir, This Is Not the Story You Think It Is, to my novel, Willis Grove, to my acclaimed Haven writing retreats here in Montana, where I am today. I love that they included me in their anthology, 20 Women Storytellers. And I'm thrilled to be a guest host on their wonderful All Things Women podcast. As you know, we always like to have you meet fascinating women who are making a positive difference in some way. Women who light up the world with their passions and missions. And I have a special guest to introduce to you today who will indeed light you up. She is the best-selling novelist, Natalie Jenner. Welcome to the Women's Eye Podcast, Natalie.
Oh, hi, Laura. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Women's Eye, for having me on today. I'm absolutely thrilled, excited to talk to a fellow author about writing, and really appreciate all the support that now my 3 books have been shown by the Women's Eye. So thank you, everyone.
The Women's Eye loves Natalie Jenner. That is for sure. So, Natalie, I'm going to read your bio first, and then I want to talk about your book. And since we're both authors, I think it's always fun to talk about the process, the craft, and then we'll open it up to some advice for inspiration. So, your bio, Natalie Jenner is the author of the instant international best-selling book, The Jane Austen Society. Probably many of you have read it. Bloomsbury Girls, I've read both. Austen at Sea, and her new novel, Every Time We Say Goodbye. Hot off the press. I believe pub day was May 15th.
1 week old today.
1 week old, brand new book, baby.
Yeah.
The Jane Austen Society was a Goodreads Choice Award finalist for Best Debut Novel and Historical Fiction. It was also a USA Today and #1 national bestseller, and was translated into 20 different languages worldwide. 20 languages worldwide. First book, amazing. Born in England and raised in Canada, our friendly Canadian neighbors. I was just telling Natalie, about 45 minutes south of the Canadian border here in Whitefish, Montana. Natalie has been a corporate lawyer, a career coach, and most recently, an independent bookstore owner in Oakville, Ontario, where she lives with her family and 2 rescue dogs. So we're so glad you're here, Natalie. Shall we dig in?
Yes, please do.
Let's do it. Okay. So first, I want to talk about the book. Again, Every Time We Say Goodbye. And then again, I'd like to go into your process, writer to writer. So here's just a brief kind of teaser description for you all if you haven't read the book yet. In 1950s Rome, a group of American and British expatriates, including Vivian Lowry from Bloomsbury Girls, if you've read that one too, became embroiled in controversy while making a movie about a female Italian resistance fighter during the occupation called La Scolaretta, the schoolgirl assassin. And it sounds intriguing, and I will tell you it is. I spent the whole weekend wrapped reading it. So Every Time We Say Goodbye, Natalie, here's my first question. For me personally, it was highly gratifying to dive into the 1950s, 60s Italian film scene because I was a film major before I realized that I was a book writer. And I was lucky enough to live in Italy for a year during college studying film. In fact, on one of our field trips, we went to the Hollywood version of the Italian version of Hollywood called Cinecittà, and we actually saw Fellini. He was walking around with a scarf. I know, my film professor almost just was just. So I want to know, and I'm sure you all do too, what drew you to this setting and this subject?
Well, I minored in film studies, and I've always loved cinema. And I think, Laura, you'll remember this well. When you go to university and you are studying film, the world of Italian cinema is gigantic, outsized relative to the size of the country. It's probably, I think, the second most movie making, country in the world. And at the time, especially after the war, after the Second World War. So I was really always a fan of Italian set movies, Italian made movies, as well as Hollywood golden age pictures. So anything from I think I crap out around 1970. So anything from like up till 1970. And I was actually watching a movie in France by Truffaut called Day for Night exactly 3 years ago. And there was all these script girls running around in jeans and t-shirts and clipboards. And I looked at my family and I was like, I think I want to write about movies next. And I think I want to call it Script Girls. And they were like, no, you can't do that. It was my second book being called Bloomsbury Girls, which was not my choice title. That wasn't my working title. So I started to just go on Wikipedia that very night. I started looking things up. And I very quickly discovered something about Italy. And that was that Cinecittà, this famous movie studio before and after the war, had been used during the Second World War, especially at the end, as international and Italian refugee camps. And that the international camp stayed open as late as 1950. And that the crowd scenes for Quo Vadis, the famous Deborah Carr, I think Robert Taylor movie, were actually filmed. They think that some of the refugees might actually be in these crowd scenes. Huh. It's conjecture, but that, as a fellow writer, you get these moments where something happens and it's like an itch you can't scratch. And you're just like, I just need to feel that. I need to be with it. I need to live with it. I need to know more. And that became a critical crux for what my plot would end up being. Except I pants, like I write by the seat of my pants. So I didn't really know how this was all going to fit into the story, but I knew that somehow it would. And I wanted to tease through that and find out how it would.
Okay, I'm skipping ahead to process because I think we're here and I can't pass it. So you say you feel it out, so do I. So are you more of an intuitive plot spinner so that the characters tell the story and you have to get out of their way so that they tell it, not knowing what the end's going to be personally? Yeah. Or do you outline it beforehand?
No, I know nothing. I know three things. When I'm ready to start typing is when I know when it's going to be set. And I mean precise year. Because I think I love writing stories set in the past for a myriad of reasons. And once I know when it's taking place, I can start to kind of visualize the issues that people at that time were facing and that would impact their choices in life. And I need to know where it's going to take place because I have a really strong love of setting. I love sinking into Chawton and the Jane Austen Society or the bookshop and Bloomsbury Girls, and Rome is my favorite city. So I was writing this in 2021. If you think about that, it was like a year into the pandemic. So we still weren't traveling as much. So I remember really wanting to go back to Rome. And the third thing I need to know before I start typing away is what is the thing that everybody wants? And I get it wrong. But in the Jane Austen Society and Bloomsbury Girls, I got it right. The Jane Austen Society said they want to save the cottage where Jane Austen lived and wrote her masterpieces and turn it into a museum. I knew that. And in Bloomsbury Girls, I knew the women were going to take over the bookshop from the male management. And then I just let my characters go. And my characters just show up. I don't know that they're coming. They're fully formed. I know everything about them temperamentally. I think I know what they want, but I don't know their secrets. So Laura, the most fun for me is the first draft because I actually, as I write, like the scene in Bloomsbury Girls where Alex, the man working in the shop, turns over the Cartier watch that belongs to his female colleague. And there's an inscription on the back that's going to prove that she did not steal the watch. I didn't know that there was an inscription until he turned over the watch. And I just pushed back from the laptop. And it's the best feeling in the world. I wish it for everybody.
I do too. I wrote a whole version of my book, Willa's Grove, which stars four main characters, but it's all through the point of view of Willa, who's the protagonist. I miss them so much all the time. And the whole first draft was, thank you very much for your service. Goodbye. Send it off on the, iceberg and start again because I was so focused on the message in that book. And then when I let the characters write it, everything changed. And that's the first question when I teach my students when we're developing characters or developing a plot, both. What does your character want? And then the second one is what's in the way of getting what she wants? Because there's the conflict. And then the third one, which is the big one, is she in the way of getting what she wants? Because that self versus self conflict is everything. So what might be is she in the way of getting what she wants answer for this one?
I mean, I think that the reason I wrote this book beyond the issues about Italy during the war and the movie making scene was because Vivian had been a real crowd favorite. And people were asking me, like, could you write more about her? I want to know more about her. I loved her. And I missed her as well, but I miss all my characters. But Vivian was the one at the end of the book who, like Evie at the end of the Jane Austen Society, had her future the least certain. And I felt that that gave me a lot to play with. And I remember very clearly again around the time that I was looking into the history of Cinecittà, I remember it just came to me why Vivian was so angry in Bloomsbury Girls. I'd never really known. I mean, I thought I knew why she was angry, but I was wrong. I was partly wrong. And I called my agent or I texted him. No, I think I called him and I said, Mitchell, I think I figured out why Vivian is so angry all the time. And I told him and he said, write it. And so I think it was her anger that was blocking her. And it was mostly anger at herself. There is a line in the book where she's angry at a lot of things, a lot of people, but she's mostly angry at herself. And that's the thing that's in her way.
Yeah, that's if anyone out there wants to write a book and you don't know where to start, go straight for the conflict and find the heart of it, right?
Exactly.
And do you see Natalie's eyes lighting up? I mean, this is fun for her.
I love it.
I know, me too. Now, I have a feeling that you love doing research. I am somebody, this is my version of research, asking people questions.
Yeah.
I'm not a library person. I love libraries, but I'm not somebody who is good at researching kind of in the traditional way. I'd rather ask people stories. And I want to know if you do research, I'm sure you do, and how that lights you up, or does it daunt you, or a little bit of both?
No, I actually don't really technically, theoretically enjoy research. I think I probably do on some level, but the idea of it does not light up my eyes. Here, I'm going to get on morose now. I do not. So basically, I'm a former lawyer, which meant that I spent a long time in school, a long time reading cases and doing research. So research is something that comes, well easily to me because of the privilege of my education. But what I tried to do is research the absolute bare minimum so that I can visualize setting and stakes and the time period. I spent just a couple of months listening to audiobooks. Like, for example, with next year's book, Austen at Sea, I listened to audiobooks for a month about Louisa May Alcott's life. And with this book, Every Time We Say Goodbye, I listened to audiobook course on Italian cinema. I listened to Sophia Loren's memoir, like just different things, trying to get the voice of people in my head as part of my research. Because like you said, you love interviewing people. I was a career coach for decades. Every day I got to have coffee with a stranger in person. And they always say in a great conversation, someone says something they shouldn't. And that's like that joyous thing of peeling away, the onion and really figuring out what makes someone tick.
And friction.
Yeah. And so with the writing piece and the research piece, the research is only there to get me going. And then I research as I go. And then at the end, when I run into things that are very complex and I feel, especially I'd say with this third book, I did the most research that I will ever do. I did the most beforehand, during, and after, because I am not Italian. I am not from that part of the world. I did not endure the trauma of the Second World War. And I felt if I'm going to write about this, not only do I have to get it right, but I'm lucky that I'm being given a pulpit and I have to honor that. So that was very important to me. So I did kill myself on the research for this, but because of that privilege, like because of that sensibility of I owe them to get this as accurate as possible as a stranger and a foreigner. And so I remember Kazuo Ishiguro, who's one of my favorite authors. He said he writes the book and then he researches, and I'm kind of leaning more towards that as much as I can. So I do what I have to, but then at the end, once it's done, I sort of verify. And that's the legal review part of this for me. It's like a legal audit. And I go through and I make sure, you said that, Natalie, but is that really why marriages weren't valid, at sea in 1865? You better go figure that out. So it does come at the end sometimes.
It must have been so interesting as a student of human beings, which writers are, to think about what it was like then. I mean, my father was in World War II. He was born in 1918, and my
Wow.
grandfather was in World War I. And so I grew up around old people in these stories, and I have all their letters. I read their letters.
Yeah.
If I'm going to do research, it's reading letters,
Yeah.
because as my father used to always say, people are the same everywhere. That said, when you're capturing the human psyche, the human heart, the human creature, you still have to be beholden to what was going on during that time and to honor it with integrity, which you have. And, deep bows to you for doing that, because I think some people get wrapped up in the romance without understanding the pain, the heartbreak.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
This beautiful and heartbreaking thing called life. So I feel like I want to talk about Vivian Lowry a little bit here.
Yeah.
So she's a complex character. She's guarded, and
Mm-hmm.
yet she's selectively open. She's defensive, and yet she's vulnerable. So what was it like writing a character like this? And I'm not going to ask that dread question, and is she you? Because I think we all know that writers mine our lives, even if it's fiction. Somehow, somewhere in there, it's probably some element of you. But I'm more interested in what the process was like to create a character like that, because she's very textured and layered.
That's a great question. I really loved writing Vivian from the get-go. She jumped on the page and jumped off the page. I remember starting that, I guess it was the second chapter of Bloomsbury Girls, and the very first line is, the fuse in the cooker is gone again, and she's like whacking the teapot, against her hip, and she's had it. And I just remember right away, I just really felt her viscerally. But I've never felt like I had anything in common with her. What I did feel as I wrote her, especially at the beginning, was, man, she is saying all the things that I wish I would say, that I would be more, um, not confrontational, more assertive, and just more open. Like you said, she's guarded, but she is open about what she wants and her ambitions. She keeps some things secret, but she's very, very willing to go after what she wants. And I just remember really admiring that spirit about her. And every time we say goodbye, what I felt for Vivian, started to get a little emotional, is just this incredible sadness for this mistake that she made. And I've been very fortunate. I want to knock wood. I've never made a mistake that I couldn't live with. Like, I've never made a mistake that haunted me. But I wanted with Vivian to explore that. I mean, I've made mistakes, but not to the point that it is keeping her from moving forward. And I wanted to explore, what do you do when you make one of the biggest mistakes of your life? Like, how do you move forward? Because we all do make mistakes, and Vivian makes one of the biggest that you could think of. And I really felt for her. I felt for the way that her personality had gotten in the way of her heart, and her wonderful heart, and her wonderful ability to love. And so I really loved writing her, because she really allowed me to explore and excavate almost every possible human emotion. And that's what I wanted to do with this book. So when you say it mixes like the light and the darkness, or the romance and the pain, I wanted to write a book that you can enjoy on many levels, that you could enjoy because it would immerse you in this beautiful La Dolce Vita time in Italy and in the film world. But I also wanted to write a book that would make us realize that we are here based on the sacrifices of those that came before us. And I think that as long as we remember that, we'll build a better world. And I wanted to show characters who were learning to do that. They were learning to become better by realizing that they owed something to the people who had sacrificed, like the schoolgirl assassin, who had given so much and given their lives and fought these wars. And that enables us to be here today. I am the daughter of a man that was born during the Second World War in England, and my grandfather fought in the Second World War, and my great grandfather fought in the First World War. So I too have that very sort of like deep history of realizing, even on a familial level, that things could have gone very different for us, and how lucky am I to be here. And I wanted this book to capture that spirit.
Beautiful. Because everyone out there who only reads memoir because we think fiction isn't real, well, I bet you anything that Natalie and I agree on this, and I haven't even said it, but I'm pretty sure that I think fiction is distilled reality. It's realer than real, and you're not beholden to what actually happened.
Yeah.
So those tears that just came up for you, I mean, do you see that? That is what happens in an author's psyche, heart, mind, soul when we're writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And I think that those tears, what I have found in my clients and in my own writing and speaking with author friends, is that that's truth moving through you. And you're so
Yes.
connected with those characters that you feel their truth. You've walked around in their shoes. It's empathy that people could argue isn't real because the characters aren't real, but it is real. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, this book is also an interesting, for me, exploration of becoming a historical fiction author, which was not something I ever set out to be. So when we talk about reinvention and leading into that, I was just a writer who happened to set stories sometimes in the past, sometimes not, but I wasn't getting published with them. And at the very end of the book, there's a scene where Daphne du Maurier, who was in Bloomsbury Girls, comes back,
Who
and
wrote
it,
Rebecca? Remember the book
yeah,
Rebecca?
and they're talking about Vivian wants to tell the story in a different way of the schoolgirl assassin, having worked on this movie about her. And she and Daphne du Maurier says to her, you know, you don't have to get it all completely right. You just have to, you know, get it true, get it real.
Yeah.
And that's the key. It's that word truth and real. Real doesn't mean what actually happened. That's what nonfiction is for. Real means capturing and conveying to people the human spirit of that moment in such a way that it resonates with us and it enables us to learn from it and to become better ourselves. And that's what fiction can do.
You and I speak the same language. I always tell my students, you don't have to be good. You just have to be true, no
Exactly.
matter what genre you're writing in.
Yeah.
So you brought up Daphne du Maurier. This is one of my questions that I'm so curious about and why I stay away from historical fiction, I think. What are the rules? And I know that
I
you
don't know.
what are
I
the,
don't,
how much can you have Peggy
I don't
Guggenheim
know.
in there. I mean, I bow at the altar of her place in Venice. I go there every time
Yeah.
in Italy, and
Yeah.
I actually had an internship there for a little while when I was
Wow.
living there that year. And I mean, she was so, over the top. And how can you put words into the mouth of a real life historic character? What are the rules?
I don't know what they are, but the lawyer in me does feel very much that it is important that with real life people, I can never move the goalposts. In other words, they can't have been running an art gallery in the 50s if they weren't running an art gallery in the 50s. So I strategically picked certain characters because they were doing things that were going to work with my plot. So there were other people that I might have liked to have included, but it's also kind of kismet that they sort of come, they speak to you, you see a Netflix documentary, something happens, and they start to kind of really like entrance you. So my responsibility, especially with Sophia Loren, is still alive, and Gina Lollobrigida was still alive when I was writing this book. I felt that my responsibility was to make sure that everything factual that I state happened, and that is the lawyer in me, because that's not always the case, especially with people who have lived until recently. And my other responsibility was to make them what I call a positive beacon of energy in the text. They are not there to cause trouble or harm or to be difficult in any way. They are there to be a positive presence, because I can never ascribe to a real person a motive less than honorable when I'm not them. It's just not fair. With Austen at Sea, which comes out next year, I was writing about Louisa May Alcott and members of Jane Austen's family, and I felt that enough time had gone by. Also, I was able to read Louisa May Alcott's journals and diaries and get a sense of some of her qualities that weren't her most positive or shining, and felt a little bit more liberated to explore that because of the distance of time and the fact that she herself had articulated these types of emotions.
Yeah, I love your ethics. I love your ethics. So I think I want to skip. Boy, I could talk to you all day. In the interest of
Yeah.
time, I I loved this quote of yours that I read. Um, you ran a bookshop,
Yeah.
and I love this quote of yours. I was getting an eye-opening window into what readers really wanted, and suddenly I knew exactly what I needed to write. So talk to us about this realization. What do readers really want?
what was really interesting was that when I had the bookshop in 2015, 2016, historical fiction was really coming into its own. So Helen Simonson had a huge hit, and The Nightingale, All the Light We Cannot See. These were like, these books are juggernauts now, and they were being published around then, and they were doing so well. So I remember realizing that people were very interested for some reason in these historical periods of conflict. And the fault lines, I think, that we've been left with, that unfortunately we're still dealing with today, right? I mean, it's just, it goes on through the future, and it haunts us, and there's so much generational trauma. And I felt like people in my bookshop were looking for answers in the past in a way that I never had. I've always gravitated towards books because of the voice of the author. It's been never as important to me when it took place. So, I love Howard's End. I love The Portrait of a Lady. I love Pride and Prejudice. I love To Kill a Mockingbird. Yes, it's important when they took place, but they're not about their time period per se. So I noticed that people were really gravitating towards that. I also noticed that people really loved Jane Austen. And so when people ask about getting published, I mean, I had tried for decades with many different books and could not get anyone to answer an email, let alone read anything. And I gave up for a bit of time. And I remember I was reading a lot of Jane Austen to get through a difficult time with my husband's health. And I remember how much people in the bookstore loved her and couldn't get enough of her. And I was going through that myself. And I remember when I was finally ready to write again after a 10-year break, I said to my family, I'm ready to write again, and I want to write a book. I said it just like this, Laura. I want to write a book about a group of people that get together and try to save Jane Austen's cottage. And that is literally the tagline of St. Martin's Press for my book. And my family was like, oh, you really were heartbroken last time when it didn't work out. Are you sure you want to do this? And I said, yeah, I'm going to do this for 3 reasons. I'm going to write it for myself because I am never happier than when I write that first draft. I'm not never happier when I research or never happier when I edit. But when I'm writing that first draft, I'm never happier. Number 2, I'm going to write it for my husband because he is my first reader. So every morning I write a chapter, and then we sit with the dogs and coffee, and I read it out loud to him. And but he loves everything. My daughter the other day, she's like, I'm not sure he's critical enough. like he just is always like, this is great, keep going. But that's what you need. You need that cheerleader. And then I said, the third reason I'm going to write again is because if it has more than a snowball's chance in hell of being of interest to somebody outside these 4 walls. And I never thought that before with my books, Laura. I'd always written what I wanted to. I'm very proud that way. I've always written the story I wanted to explore, but I wasn't thinking about that hook at all. And I stumbled on it with the Jane Austen Society. And the last thing to say about that is that I remember when I talked to my agent for the first time on the phone, and I always get a little emotional here too.
That's okay. Said, it's truth moving through you. It's truth.
So, but I had never heard, like, nobody was ever interested in my work. And he read the first, I think he asks for a 50-page submission. He read the first 50 pages in Manhattan on the subway a world away from me. He missed a stop. And he emailed me, one of those emails that changes your life, right? You know. And he said, give me 24 hours, give me an exclusive, and I will get back to you. And he said to me something else that I would share with aspiring writers, is that he said his biggest thing as he's reading that very first time is, can they sustain it?
Yeah.
And that is what they're looking for. And so we made an appointment to talk on the phone. And he said to me, I get dozens of Jane Austen submissions all the time, like every month, because he represents other people in that space. Yeah. And he said, but I don't think anyone's ever done World War II before. And I got chill up my spine. And that's when I knew. That's when I knew. I went, oh, I have stumbled onto something. And then he said, this book is going to be a bestseller. It's going to change your life. And it did.
Let's call it an intentional stumbling.
Yeah.
I think it's a confluence. I've experienced that too, where my agent wasn't even going to send out my first book, the memoir. I never even meant to write a memoir. I always wrote fiction. And same with you. Someday we can compare, our own war stories. And I just wrote my way through a marital crisis, sent it to my agent. She said, Yeah, Laura, we're having a really hard time getting your novels published. You don't have a platform. You left the you left the land of movers and shakers and decision makers and holed up in Montana. You need a platform. So I'm not even going to send this thing out. Well, I wrote the short version. It went crazy viral in Modern Love and the New York Times. And
Oh, yeah.
suddenly I'm working with the top marketing and publicity team, like Amy Einhorn at Penguin,
Yeah.
Putnam, Random House, the whole thing, baptism by fire. And it really was a confluence of just, I think, I don't know, we could talk about this forever, but
Yeah.
to me, it was knowing why I write in the first place
Yeah.
and a very big layer of surrender. I may never get
Yeah.
published, but I'm never going to stop this thing. And that's what I hear in you, Natalie.
Yeah.
You're a true writer. Yes, you've been lots of things to a lot of people, but to me, you are a true writer's writer. It's been brewing in you for years and now it's
Yeah.
coming out. It makes perfect sense. So I'd like to leave this conversation, not at all, but because I have to, I'd like to leave it with some sort of advice about reinvention for the people out there who are in a job. Maybe it pays well, maybe it, health insurance, all that stuff in this country at least. What gave you the courage to reinvent? Was there a longing in you? I mean, to go from being a lawyer to a bookstore owner and a coach for many years in between, you're no stranger to reinvention. So, do you have some pearls of wisdom about how to get the courage to reinvent, especially in a brand new field?
Well, I think that is the answer was that I had done it before in different ways. And I think it's like a muscle, like resilience that you have to exercise. And, you know, God knows I love my husband, but he's one of those people like making decisions is not his favorite thing to do. I love making decisions. And when I would coach people about career change, and I would be like, you're not going to get a crystal ball. Like, no one is going to tell you what is exactly the right thing to choose right now. But the act of making a decision in and of itself has value. And the more you do it, the more you start to intuitively, I think, realize when the bigger risks are worth it. And so by doing the smaller risks earlier in life, when it came time to decide to leave the practice of law or to open a bookshop, all those things, which are, I think, big-ish decisions, I had the muscles to do it. And so my advice would be to practice decision making wherever you can, especially if it scares you. And that I do feel that if you go with your heart, because I remember my agent said to me, he goes, your heart is all over this book. Like he said, your heart is all over this manuscript. And that is the one thing no one in this business can fake. And anyone else who reads Jane Austen Society, and he has said that about my other books as well, it's like they're going to see, like you said about truth, your heart is all over this. And I believe that if you go with your heart and what, because that is who you are, what makes you tick. If you heed that, then you will probably stay in like the right direction for you as a person. And there's
Yep.
another thing that I always say to people too is like people will give you advice and they'll tell you what to do, but when you make mistakes based on that advice, you're just learning their life lessons. You're not learning your own life lessons. And so I think it's really important to pay attention to your own heart and your own truth. And I really think that if you practice decision making as much as possible in a positive sort of self-learning way, that it will position you for those times in life when there are big opportunities or big chances.
Go with your heart. And then, per what we know about creating a novel,
Yeah,
what do you want? And what's in the way of getting what you want?
yeah,
And
exactly.
take that as not just a challenge, but if it's a challenge, a loving challenge. Be curious about what do I want and what's in the way of getting what I want. Be playful about it, but be kind to yourself. I hear a deep inner kindness in you between yourself and yourself. Am I barking up the right tree on that?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think that I'm very lucky. I was raised by incredibly wonderful people who made me feel very loved. My family makes me feel very loved. I'm given no excuse in life to be unnecessarily down on myself. I've been really lucky, and I think that when I talk about paying back, or at least paying homage to people who have sacrificed for us before, I think the other thing that you have to do is when you have been given love in this world and people around you are supportive, you kind of owe yourself to not stay positive, but to to feel that on a daily basis. And so I try very much to practice gratitude and kindness. Somebody said recently, you cannot be stressed and grateful at the same time. And they said, try it. And I remember thinking, like, I think it was on an Instagram reel. I remember trying, I'm going to try and be grateful and stressed. You can't do it. And so I think gratitude is huge for me right now.
Good. I hope it is for all of us. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So hopefully, if we can't do both at the same time, hopefully we don't let the stress lord over the gratitude.
Yeah.
We can make room for gratitude. Okay, so thank you so much, Natalie. I'm going to wrap up and just say a few more things about The Woman's Eye, but everybody go get this book. Get it from a bookstore that you love. You know, all the usuals. I like to support independent bookstores, especially since we are talking to an independent bookstore owner, previous independent bookstore owner. Every time we say goodbye by the wonderful Natalie Jenner. Thanks for being here, Natalie. Don't go away. I'm going to just say a few things about The Woman's Eye. You can learn more about Natalie and her book every time we say goodbye by going to thewomenseye.com and, of course, to her website, nataliejenner.com. At thewomenseye.com, you'll also find various Women's Eye books, 20 Women Changemakers and 20 Women Storytellers. And that's over at womenstorytellers.com. Shop wherever you buy books and at changemakersbook.com. And to learn more about Natalie's book tour, because she's on book tour right now, the book's hot off the press, go over to her website again, nataliejenner.com. Thanks again, Natalie. And to
Thank
all
you,
of you, you're welcome. It's a total pleasure, author to author, in honor of women, powerful women, people who are expressing themselves honestly with integrity. And to all of you for tuning into the Woman's Eye podcast. Thanks for being here. Be sure to rate, review, subscribe. I'm Laura Munson. And remember, it is the world as we see it.